Welcome everyone to today's webinar focused on disability confidence, achieving inclusive leadership in times of change. In today's session, we'll take a look at what it means to be an inclusive leader in today's workplaces. We'll focus on how to create an inclusive culture for disabled employees and those with neurodiverse conditions. And you'll hear from industry leaders who will share best practice alongside practical thoughts and solutions that you can take into your own organisation and career. We're really excited to welcome today's guest panellists, Jane Farrell, Chief Executive and Co-founder at the EW Group, Mike Hickman, Diversity and Inclusion Lead at Department for Transport, and our very own Stuart Blair, Workplace Solutions Manager at TextHelp. So the panellists will introduce themselves in just a moment. First up, some housekeeping. So I'm Donna Thompson and I will be your host on behalf of TextHelp for today's session. Hopefully you're all connected to the webinar, you can hear my voice and you can see the slides. Now, if you're not familiar with the GoToWebinar software, you should see a little panel on the right-hand side of your screen that looks something like the one on the slide now. In here, you can control your audio settings. And as an attendee, you're on listen-only mode so that everyone attending can have a good listening experience. We do encourage you to ask questions though, and you can submit them to us at any time throughout the presentation using the questions section on the GoToWebinar panel. We'll monitor these questions as we go along and answer as many of them as we can at the end. Now, if you experience any technical issues, the quickest way to get a response is to email groupmarketing@texthelp.com. That's groupmarketing@texthelp.com. Today's webinar will be recorded and we will share the recording and the slides with you tomorrow or early next week at the latest. So one last thing from me before we get started. If you'd like to talk about today's session or if you think of any questions once the session has finished, you can reach us on the Twitter hashtag you can see on the slide now. That's #DisabilityConfidentWebinar. So let's meet today's panelists and get on with the show. Jane, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Thank you very much, Donna, and it's a real pleasure to be having this conversation with everybody today. As Donna says, I'm the Chief Executive of the Equality Works Group, and I set this company up in 1992 with somebody called Dr. Annie Hedge. And we've always looked at all aspects of diversity and inclusion, from social class, disability, ethnicity, and the whole range. And we're focused on inclusive leadership, addressing unconscious bias, and helping organisations make those quarter turns to build on good practice and be even better. So we're always focused on practical actions.
That's lovely, Jane, and welcome. Next up, we have Mike Hickman. Mike, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi there, everyone, and thanks, Donna and TextHelp for having me on here today. My name is Mike Hickman. I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Lead for the Department for Transport. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to having a chance to talk to you about our the fact that we're a disability confidence leader and part of how we got there and the work that we've got going on at the moment.
That's lovely. Thanks, Mike. And last but not least, Stuart, if you'd like to introduce yourself and kickstart the session.
Thanks, Donna. Hi, everyone. My name is Stuart. I am the Workplace Solutions Manager at TextHelp. I've spent the last 2 years going into organisations within the public and private sector and speaking to them about neurodiversity, trying to raise the presence of neurodiversity, and letting these types of organisations know what support is actually available for them, for their staff, whether that be through ourselves or what other schemes are out there. The other side of my role was going to these organisations and speaking to them about their window to the world and helping them focus on their website accessibility. So making sure all their customers, clients, citizens can access the content that they're trying to share. But enough about me, and on to what we're here to talk about today. So this is our 4th Disability Confident webinar in the series. And before we delve into today's topic, where we're going to explore the best practices alongside practical examples on achieving inclusive leadership, I want to take a look back at the areas that we've explored so far, and I also want to review the results to date of our D&I survey that I know many of you have taken part in, to get a snapshot of where we are all in within our D&I journey. If you have missed the survey, don't worry, you can still take part. I'm going to pop the link into the chat box at the end of my session. The survey will continue to run for a little while, and we're going to share the final results when we decide to close it off. Back in October, TechStop managed to move up the ranks from committed to employer status within the Disability Confidence Scheme, and we were really proud of this achievement. And of course, as you'd expect, we mention it to all of our clients at every opportunity. But very quickly, we realised that the scheme wasn't that well known among businesses within the UK, so we wanted to do something on a bigger scale than just the one-to-one conversations that we have been having up until that point. So what better way to engage with a large audience than a webinar? There's no cost to register. You can listen to it in your own time, since we can record it and share it with you afterwards. And you can listen to it from the comfort of your own home, something that we've all become very used to and is the norm since COVID hit us back in March. So October's webinar was entitled Why Disability Confidence Makes Good Business Sense. And we were thrilled to have guest speakers from HS2, Osita Madhu, Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, and from The Telegraph, Asif Sadiq, Head of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging, who came along and shared their journey to date with the scheme. For us, we talked about the Disability Confidence Scheme is close to our hearts. It's our vision for a world where difference, disability and language are no longer barriers. And it's our mission to unlock everyone's full potential through innovative technology. As a company, it really is within our DNA. And we shared our commitments to the scheme. And those commitments were to address our recruitment policies and to actively recruit as a disability-friendly organisation. We want to partner with a local mental health organisation to provide work experience for people with varying disabilities. And we wanted to develop our own workplace skills within this area. And to date, we're really proud to say we've made great progress. We're on our way to becoming a disability confident leader. In the meantime, we're doing all that we can to spread the word about the scheme to as many businesses across the UK as possible. Looking back in October, our key takeaways were that 15,000 employers had signed up to the scheme, so awareness of the scheme was relatively low. We hosted our first webinar to generate awareness, and we created and shared resources for employers to learn more. These resources included the Employer's Guide to Becoming Disability Confident, a Disability Confident resources area on our website with walk through the steps and how to sign up to the scheme. We also have blogs from HS2 and another one from The Telegraph sharing their journey so far with the Disability Confidence Scheme and how they support their disabled staff. If you missed that live session, don't worry, you haven't missed out. All of our webinars are recorded and available to view on demand. All the links are going to be shared with you after today's session so you can catch up. With such strong interest back in October's webinar and engagement with the resources that we shared, we thought we'd come back with another webinar in March. And our ultimate goal remained exactly the same. We want to generate awareness in the Disability Confidence Scheme. This time we thought we'd delve a little deeper into the start of everyone's journey to become more disability confident. We did that by looking at how best to attract and retain diverse staff. This time we were joined by Kate Headley. She's Managing Director of the Clear Company, one of the UK's leading diversity and inclusion consultancies, who were involved in creating the Disability Confidence Scheme with the UK government, so they had great insight into what it is and how it works. We were also joined by Paul Deemer, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at NHS Employers. The NHS being one of the biggest employers in the UK, they had great examples of best practice and learnings from implementing their own D&I strategies. We covered quite a lot of ground in this webinar, and the wealth of knowledge between Paul and Kate is obviously impressive. And to look at some of the key learnings that the listeners from that session walked away with regarding inclusive recruitment and retaining a diverse workforce. In terms of inclusive recruitment, we learned about things like how to reach a wider pool of talent, how to get our job specs and adverts right, and how to remove the bias from the process. For retaining a diverse workforce, we looked at how to ensure individual needs are supported in the role, and how to create an environment that encourages staff to raise their hand and request additional support when it's needed. We had some great examples from Paul about the initiatives the NHS have in place to support the diversity of its huge workforce, and Kate shared some really great examples from organisations she's helped to carve their own D&I strategies. This really is a great webinar, and you should catch up on all the advice that was shared by Paul and Kate. We were now on a quarterly rollout by this stage, of course, and we'd no idea that come June, we'd also be dealing with a global pandemic at the same time. The pandemic had a massive impact on the way we work, many of us working from home for the first time. And it's important to realise that staff with disabilities and neurodiverse conditions such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD or Asperger's found this new way of working particularly overwhelming, especially given how swift and unexpected that change in environment was. So June's webinar focused on helping employers to better understand the workforce and support all their staff to help to adapt to this change. And we were really excited to be joined by Julie Dennis, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at ACAS, the governing body that provides free impartial advice for employers and employees on workplace rights, rules and best practice, and Rachel Billington, Diversity and Inclusion Lead at the Met Police. Julie had some great advice around key areas that organisations should consider given the current crisis, such as ensuring staff have the equipment required to work effectively from home instead of their usual location. And Rachel talked about the tools the Met Police have introduced to support change, such as their disability passports that are designed to support individual needs and adjustments as they travel through the organisation and remove or minimise the individual having to repeat or justify their requirements to new line managers. Some of the big takeaways from June's webinar were the number of staff with neurodiversities and hidden disabilities is actually 7 in 1. So we highlighted some of the challenges that people with neurodiversities may be facing during these changing ways of working. So difficulties such as anxiety or time management, planning, prioritisation, sensory overload, working memory weakness, and even processing speed. And we shared some ways that you can support all of your team with great advice from ACAS and introduction to inclusive software that is already helping over 25 million people around the world to work smarter and more effectively and more accurately than ever before. That's actually text help software read and write. If you'd like to learn more about that software, drop a comment into the chat box and we'll come back to you about it at the end of the session. We learned about the disability passports introduced by Met Police and how they're really helping to transform the oldest police force in the world. And personally, I think these passports are an incredible idea, something that should be adopted across every organisation in the UK. And we've got a great blog that explains the passports in more details. And with everything else, we'll link this at the end of the session because it is a really great read. So that brings us to today's webinar. And we asked the question, where are we now? Today, there are over 18,500 employers signed up to the disability scheme. Do we help? Well, we certainly hope so, but it's absolutely not over. There's still so many businesses in the UK that are not yet signed up to the scheme. So our goal is to continue to beat the disability confidence drum until people literally tell us to go away. We want every employer in the UK and beyond to be as inclusive as possible to create fair and equal opportunities for everybody, which is why today's theme is around supporting inclusive leaders. It's one thing recruiting diverse talent, but that alone doesn't necessarily guarantee performance. We need inclusive leadership to ensure team members are treated respectfully and fairly and are confident to follow the career path that they so desire. Before we move on to today's theme, as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to finish my part by taking a quick look back at some of the headline results and trends that we spotted so far in our D&I survey. The first area I wanted to highlight is around the presence of D&I leadership within your organisations. And we asked you, do you have a D&I leader in your organisation? You can see the results on your screen at the moment. Glassdoor said in its 2020 job trends that it predicts recruitment of D&I specialists will become a majority priority for employers in the coming year. And global job site Indeed, by comparison, saw D&I positions grew by 23% to November 2019. So 79% is absolutely a positive result. Let's hope this number continues to climb as organisations continue to modernise their culture, attract new employees, and become more aware of the individual support that employees may need. Next up, we asked you what the main goal of your D&I programme was. It's absolutely no surprise to see that supporting staff is the majority, followed by attracting new talent. Often, it's easier to open a dialogue with existing staff about their needs and buyers, but it's great to see that businesses are clearly thinking about the bigger picture, thinking about the starting point with recruitment and the next generation of talent that's out there, ensuring the culture of the organisation is reflective of the communities that they're trying to serve. Next up, we asked you what your top 3 priorities were in D&I. And to be honest, I'm a little surprised, but I'm obviously thrilled that disability is top of that list, especially given the coverage and awareness campaigns for other areas such as gender and race. Maybe there's a little bias at play here because the question that we shared was following the link to sign up for a disability confident webinar. But that said, I do feel that disability is climbing up the agenda in many organisations. There's far less stigma attached to openly discussing challenges and disabilities among colleagues, especially since the pandemic. The final question I want to pick out from the survey is around challenges, and we asked you what the biggest D&I challenge your organisation has. It's no surprise to see time and resource as the main one here. I see this a lot within organisations I work with, and my advice is to make the time. I know it sounds easy to say, but it's not so much in practice. But in my experience, the organisations that are leading the way with D&I strategies and practice understand to be effective, there has to be a cultural shift in the organisation and a focus for everyone, not just one person that happens to look after D&I as part of their responsibilities. To make a change, the whole organisation needs to change. In summary, I feel really, really encouraged by the results of the survey. Most have started their journey to supporting people with disabilities at work, and starting is often the hardest part. The biggest hurdle, like we just mentioned, is time and resources. But hopefully with awareness campaigns such as this webinar, organisations will start to understand the great benefits investing in D&I brings. Thanks to everyone who's taken part in the survey to date. And as I said earlier, for those of you who have missed it, there's still plenty of time to share your thoughts. If you follow the link in the slides after the show, we'd really love to hear your input. I'm sure you're glad to hear that brings to an end my part of today's presentation. I think you've probably all heard enough of my voice. I'm going to be back for the Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, please add them in the chat box and I'll try and answer as many as possible. Thank you very much for listening, and I will pass you back to my colleague Donna.
Lovely. Thanks, Stuart. It is really great to see the rise in D&I leaders. Not that long ago, organisations really were relying on employees from underrepresented groups to spark change, from a ground level. But now we're really starting to see that cultural shift that you talked about, within organisations with that top-down approach to building an environment that's inclusive to all. So it's really great progress. So let's now hear from Jane Farrell from the EW Group, who can tell us more about the steps organisations are taking to make this cultural shift and develop inclusive leadership within senior teams. So Jane, over to you when you're ready. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Donna, and thanks, Stuart. So I've been asked to talk about being disability confident and achieving inclusive leadership, and I'm going to be talking about the whole range of social identity because, after all, none of us are only one-dimensional. So we're going to be thinking, as I mentioned before, around social class as well as gender, as well as sexual orientation as a disability. And I hope you enjoy it. Thanks, Donna. It would be remiss to do a session on inclusive leadership without acknowledging some of the Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and all that has engendered. It has been a real catalyst to many of the best organisations to think again about diversity and inclusion, and to think about whatever it is that they were doing, it just isn't enough. And there's been some great examples of leadership. For example, the chief executive of Merck, Ken Frazier, and many others who have taken a stand and spoken out about diversity and inclusion. And that it is beholden on us all, isn't it, to make sure that that just isn't a statement, that inclusive leaders actually say and do things differently in order to create more inclusive cultures that Stuart has been referring to. Thanks, Donna. Some of the things that we're talking about with our clients are that it is impossible to be a great leader unless you are an inclusive leader, unless you can talk about how precisely you take account of difference in the way that you run a team meeting, write a strategy, line manage somebody. So it's so far away from being a waffly approach to leadership. It's tell me precisely how you take account of neurodiversity in the way that you lead your team. Tell me precisely how you take account of ethnicity in the way that you recruit and select staff. And that's where the hard-edged work is going on at the moment with the best organisations and companies. It's what is it that you say and do day in, day out to take account of all aspects of social identity. It's really important, isn't it, that if we that we all know if we put the business case for diversity and inclusion into Google, 6 Harvard Business Review articles will pop up making the business case for diversity and inclusion to make sure that, as Stuart was talking about and Donna was talking about, that all people's talents are used, and that the people are not overlooked because of one or more aspect of their social identity. Quite a few of our clients are also talking to us about how they definitely see being an inclusive leader as a source of competitive advantage. And that wasn't in my experience being talked about so much 10 years ago. So of course, if an organisation wants to actually recruit the very best people from across the world, then they need to think about how they recruit and select, so that they don't simply choose the people who are like the people who are already there. And we all know that if we don't address thinking about how advantage and disadvantage is operating in the recruitment process, we'll simply carry on choosing people fundamentally who are like the people who are already at the top. So I think it's interesting also around links to innovation and creativity, and so as in diverse experiences in the room. If we have 6 people in the room and they are all exactly the same, it's difficult to explain really why we're having a meeting. It's how is it that people's rich, diverse experiences is brought in, and the best, some of our best clients are seeing this as a real source of competitive advantage. We'll be talking about recruiting and retaining the best, because there needs to be a lot of focus on recruitment, because disabled people are dramatically underrepresented at middle and senior levels, as are many other other groups. So Black and Asian staff are underrepresented at middle and senior positions and so on. But sometimes what's missed is how to retain people as well. We know that people can get very disheartened if they're overlooked, if they never get the acting up positions, for example, because the line manager just chooses somebody who she or he feels very comfortable with. So I think the creating the culture where everybody feels as though they can fly, that they can shine, that they are understood and appreciated is part of this strategic narrative around inclusive leadership. So there is, of course, a business case that we can all read about, a general business case, but there's also, for the best organisations, thinking through what is this specific business case for the Metropolitan Police or the BBC or Barnardo's or Adidas or wherever it is. And we're very encouraging of our clients to think, well, what is your real business case? And working that through. And the final thing is, the best organisations want their inclusive leaders to be passionate about difference, to be passionate about understanding that difference brings real benefits. I set up the business with Dr. Annie Hedge in 1992 because of what I'm feeling very passionate about social justice, but equally passionate about the business case. It's bringing all of that together that inclusive leaders really understand. Thanks, Donna. At the heart of it, we think this is what inclusive leaders have thought through. It's very simple in a sense, but when we're advantaged, it's difficult to spot because the world is built for us. It is everything seems quite smooth and easy, whether that's going on transport or whether it's getting housing or whether it's being heard in meetings. It is what we are used to because we are advantaged. When we're disadvantaged, of course, we spot it in a microsecond because it is very familiar to us. And that is, every single inclusive leader needs to understand this, this very simple is two very simple sentences on that screen, because inclusive leaders need to think about how to disrupt the way in which discrimination and prejudice are working. They need to be able to creatively think through how to make sure that they don't have criteria that, for example, is based on must have 3 years experience, when what we all know is that we know some of us know people who have got 20 years experience, and they're not necessarily very good, whereas other people have yet to have that experience but have got all the skills and abilities to do a brilliant job. There's something, isn't there, about when we feel as though we are getting lots of taps on the shoulder, as it were, at work, when we are encouraged to go for leadership positions, that feels good. We think, oh yes, people are doing that because they see how brilliant we are. Sometimes it can be that our line manager is like us in relation to gender, ethnicity, for example, being non-disabled, and so on. So this very basic contention is key. Inclusive leaders understand that, and they've also thought through how they personally have been advantaged in terms of their social identity. So they've thought through their white privilege. They have thought through what benefits they have gained, not necessarily because they want it, but because the world is built like that. Non-disabled people have thought through how they've been advantaged in their careers and in their lives. Not because people should then feel guilty for who or what they are, but inclusive leaders actually think through, okay, so I've been advantaged in relation to X, Y, and Z. I've been disadvantaged in terms of A, B, and C, and this is how I am going to go about making sure that I don't keep on replicating that in the way that I line manage, in the way that I procure services, in the way that I lead teams. So I think it's a really good thing for us all to do, is to think about, well, how am I? How have I been advantaged? How am I advantaged? And what can I do about that as a leader to make sure I don't replicate it? Thanks, Donna. So just to go through some of the business context that I'm sure you're all familiar with, but you know, it's key, isn't it, that lots of job seekers are assessing organisations about whether it is a business context that they can thrive in, and that certainly focuses the minds of some organisations. So they want to be seen to be taking account of the fact that people are looking at them and thinking, well, are they up to speed or are they behind the times? What do their policies say? Are they disability confident? Are they doing exciting things? What about their representation? How many disabled people have they got in the organisation and at middle and senior levels, etc., etc. And that is a driver for in some contexts for taking action to make sure that inclusion is a thing that people think about day in, day out, not only when they attend a training course. It's something that they know that they have to weave into what they say and do every day. Moving to the other aspects of the slide here. So the link to high performance, as I say, is very well researched, but it's really thinking through how is it that we can make sure that we create inclusive cultures where people can thrive. I'm really interested also in discretionary effort. If my line manager demonstrates an understanding and awareness of who I am in the round, my socioeconomic background, my ethnicity, my sexual orientation, whether I'm a non-disabled, disabled person, etc., etc. If they show an awareness of that, then actually I am much more likely to be engaged and passionate about my work, much more likely to make that perhaps extra 10% effort in that business. And some of our really best performing clients on inclusive leadership really get that, and they measure it. They measure it through pulse surveys, they measure it through retention rates, they measure it through lots of consultations with different networks within their organisation, and they gain business benefit from it. Thanks, Donna. So, as I was saying, if people are like us, then we are more willing to take a risk. And I say like us, they share an aspect of social identity with us. If they're more likely to take a risk if let's say they come from the same part of the country sometimes, whether they share an ethnicity with us or a socio-economic background. They're willing to take a risk. If we are not like the person that it's employing us, they tend not to take a risk. Who gets the acting up positions is really, really key, isn't it? If I'm choosing people who are like me, in inverted commas, then actually what it means is that other people notice that they don't really stand a chance to shine. Those acting up positions, those exciting opportunities are not actually given to them, so they don't get a tap on the shoulder. And there's very good evidence to say that the more like your line manager you are, then the more likely they will rate your performance at a higher level. And that's really interesting, and the best inclusive leaders are really thinking about their own unconscious bias. Because of course what we know is, whether it's unconscious or not, if you're on the receiving end of it, it still hurts. We sometimes say, if somebody pokes me in the eye with a pencil, this is the equivalent to being biased, then even if they say, well, I'm really sorry, my eye still hurts. And then if it happens again and again, which it can do in terms of the way in which discrimination and disadvantage works, then not surprisingly, organisations lose talent and the passion and skill and innovation of people, and actually people leave or move on. So constantly when we're thinking about inclusive leadership, we're thinking about how is it that every single aspect of an organisational culture can be looked at through an inclusion lens. So whether it's about, as I say, recruitment and selection, the way that people are line managed, the images on a website, the way in which diversity and difference is spoken about, is interesting. The best inclusive leaders have a narrative around difference, and they can talk very confidently about what they say and do to take account of difference. Thanks, Donna. So some points here to whisk through. I think it's really important that inclusive leaders link diversity and inclusion to performance and success, because too often diversity and inclusion is linked to things that are negative or troublesome. Inclusive leaders talk about the benefits of diversity and inclusion and link them to organisational values. And they don't only do that every 6 months at big events. They're doing it day in, day out. They're talking about how fantastic it is to have diverse voices and different points of view when they are having a discussion about a new service that's being delivered. So it's this point about inclusive leaders talking about diversity and inclusion day in, day out. I think one of the third bullet point is really key, is that inclusive leaders really listen with humility to people's experience. Too often people can talk about their experience, and leaders and organisations can say, oh, no, it's got nothing to do with X, Y and Z, it's actually to do with something else. Whereas the best inclusive leaders really listen, and we've seen that a lot in good organisations, with really listening to Black and Asian staff about how they feel about Black Lives Matter and their day-to-day experiences for themselves and their families. And then inclusive leaders, with determination, do something about it. Otherwise, it's just theoretical, isn't it? We often talk to inclusive leaders about, we want them to be as confident on equality and diversity and inclusion as everything else. So as well as being a fantastic accountant, they can talk about the benefits of diversity and inclusion, as well as being a fantastic strategic thinker. They can also talk about diversity and inclusion. And quite often that's not the case. It takes some skill and learning for people to become confident on all of these issues. And let's face it, we're all on a learning curve, aren't we? We all need to be aware of how microaggressions might be being played out in our organisations, unless we're really thoughtful about how harassment and bullying happen. Sometimes it can be hidden to us unless we're really looking out for it. The next two things are critical, isn't it? It's in the end, inclusive leaders say and do things that will create change. They will positively encourage the use and celebration of assistive technology, that they will absolutely see neurodiverse people as a fantastic benefit, and that they are saying and do things day in, day out. And finally, that the successes are celebrated. We often come across lots of good practice, but it's not known about it across an organisation. And inclusive leaders are talking about those successes because it counterbalances some of the negativity. Thanks, Donna. So, inclusive leaders do all of these things. They notice difference. Sometimes people have said, haven't they, in the past, well, I don't even notice whether people are disabled or non-disabled, black or white, men or women, etc., etc. And actually, I understand that, but it won't do really, because inclusive leaders need to notice it so that they can disrupt the way in which disadvantage and discrimination is working in their organisations. Talked about creating an inclusive culture in all those ways around decision making and hiring and so on. Sometimes I think the third thing is the most important. It's just pausing just before I go to hand out the exciting opportunity to somebody who I've worked with a long time, who I know really well. I pause and think, how do I provide opportunities for a diverse people to take these exciting opportunities? Get the data right, really interesting. If we haven't got the data, it's difficult for us to prove that things are moving forward, and that's important for us all. And then finally, as I say, it's building the confidence and competence to talk about all aspects of diversity and inclusion day in, day out. Thanks, Donna. Thanks, everybody.
Lovely, Jane, that's great. I really liked your 5 pillars of inclusive leadership there. I think the biggest takeaway really from me is that communication really is at the heart of, unlocking talent and building the high performing teams that we all desire. It is encouraging to learn that more and more organisations are starting to open up this dialogue really with the staff and think outside the box, in terms of recruitment and staff development. So that brings me nicely on to our last speaker of today, Mike Hickman, Diversity and Inclusion Lead at the Department for Transport. So Mike is going to talk us through some of the practical things and programs that are in place at the department, and of course tell us a little bit about their journey to becoming disability confident leader. So Mike, over to you when you're ready.
Thank you, Donna, and it was great to hear from you as well, Jane. I'm filled with a little bit of confidence in that we seem to be doing at least some of the bits that you mentioned there. So yeah, Donna, if we go into the next slide. So what I'd really like to talk to you all about are, I guess, some of the things that we do here at DFT, some of the things that we're looking at, and I guess making sure that we share some of those ideas in order to get people moving in the same direction. So for me, things start with understanding your current situation, knowing what you're dealing with and what you're trying to get towards. So we've been doing and managing a lot of data within DFTC, working on increasing the rates of data declaration, making sure people feel comfortable sharing that information and that they're confident in terms of them knowing what we're using that information for. And please don't get me wrong, we're certainly not there yet. There's still work for us to do in this area, but we're certainly moving in the right direction with it. And I think alongside understanding that sort of data and where you want to go comes accountability. So for us, we use things like having race, disability, gender, and some of the other protected characteristics. So we have champions for those areas, and those are our senior leaders that take active posts. And all of these roles come with role profiles, so there are expectations placed on them as well in terms of what we expect of them, what the networks expect of them, and how we want to work with them to improve the situation. We also leverage things like ensuring everyone has a diversity and inclusion objective, and that those goals themselves are SMART goals. So I'll go on to SMART in a later slide, but just making sure that there's some substance to it and what success is going to look like and how they're planning on getting there. The other thing that we do is ensure that at interview, every person that joins DFT now gets asked a diversity and inclusion question. So Jane covered this herself, but really digging into what diversity and inclusion means to them, what their understanding of it is, how they've been an active part of improving that situation. And that really ties back into DFT's values, making sure that what we're saying at that sort of strategic higher level really does filter down and become part and parcel of our daily business. And I guess the other part of it is that when you have all of this data, when you've secured all of it and you've been able to work out where the gaps are, where the opportunities are, where you're falling short and where you're succeeding, we share that information. We talk about being open and transparent a lot, don't we? But sometimes we can be very, very precious over the data that we have. But we work on ways of sharing that information while not giving away people's confidential information. So managing how we share that and what level we can share that at, while still making sure that people understand how their various teams or directorates are doing within the business, and then engaging them in conversation. So what can we do to change it? Are there other teams that are doing things that you can share and take those ideas from? And that takes me quite nicely onto action and awareness, which is the next slide, Donna, please. So in terms of that action and awareness side of things, I talked about the SMART goals as they were, and I'm sure a lot of you will know what they are, but just in case, it basically talks about setting yourselves specific, measurable, attainable, related and time-based goals. So this is really digging in and making sure that the things that you're trying to do, the goals that you're going to set yourself, will have a purpose. What success is going to look like. It's not beyond capability or possibility, and that you're giving yourself realistic deadlines and times in which to achieve those things. So again, coming back to DFT, we have set ourselves our own internal flow targets, particularly for our senior civil servants, because from our data, we are better represented the further down you go into our grade system, as you were. So those kinds of things in mind, we work on a range of different things in terms of addressing the issues that we have, and really I'd break them down into three main sections. So recruitment, retention and progression are the three that we look at, as well as the bigger picture, which is culture. And in that sense, we break those areas down. we look at our numbers, we're able to tell, for instance, with the recruitment stages, where people are falling out and how people are doing throughout that process. So as a disability confidence leader, we also subscribe to the guaranteed interview scheme, which essentially means that if someone puts themselves forward as having a disability and meets the minimum requirements set by the recruitment manager, that they're brought forward to interview. So looking at our data, then you can go back, you can have a look, you can see that we're pulling forward good numbers in terms of those disabled candidates. However, at interview stage, that's when those numbers take a dive. So that, for us, raises some other questions on how do we address that? How do we make sure that we're effectively not setting people up to fail? Are we giving them enough information about, you know, our processes, these civil service interview processes? Are we sharing, you know, what they need to know in order to be successful? Do they have the same opportunities or access to information as an internal candidate, for instance? At the moment, I'd argue that they don't, but there is some work underway in terms of how we can look to address that, and that's doing things like outreach. So in a previous life, I was a police officer working on the D&I team there, and we did a lot of work with our underrepresented groups to demystify what the police is, you know, the different opportunities that there are, the benefits, and the recruitment process. And that's something that we've started to mirror here in DFT, and it has been beneficial, and we've seen through our most recent recruitment drives that those numbers are coming up, which is fantastic to see. So if I move on to the next slide, please, Donna. So in terms of change processes, so this is really looking into how we do what we do and how we go about challenging, changing those systems. One of the examples that I've put in here is involving people in decision making. So for me, it talks about that song in Hamilton about having the people in the room where the decisions are made. And for us at the moment, we don't have that representation in our senior civil servants. So what we've done as that sort of interim measure is create shadow committees. And a shadow committee is effectively a committee made up of underrepresented groups, which can then take a seat in some of our committees or our executive committee meetings or boards, and be able to share their thoughts. And that way, by putting them in the room, it does a couple of things. For me, it means that those voices are heard, which is absolutely key to what we're doing. For me, it also highlights people that have the potential to work at those strategic levels, and highlights skill to others, and also provides a bit of access and understanding around what happens in these secretive meetings that take place that not everyone is invited to. I've already mentioned the guaranteed interview scheme and the pros and the cons that we found with that process. But looking at recruitment as a wider piece, we've done things like looking at the wording that we use in those adverts, making sure that it's open and inclusive, and also with some of the bulk recruitment that we've been doing recently, really engaging with our staff networks as well, bringing them into the conversation, asking them to have a look and get their take on things. As a D&I lead, I'm often referred to as a subject matter expert, but I don't have all the answers as one person. We try and make sure that our diversity and inclusion team is as diverse as possible, so that we can have a lot of those conversations. But it's absolutely key to involve the people that are actually doing the work in those conversations. Then it's already been mentioned, things like people survey scores or pulse surveys, as they call them. We're also doing a load of culture inquiries with various networks within DFT, and that really gives us an understanding of the current situation, the feel within the department at the moment, and allows us, I guess, access to information that might not be sort of given to us on a one-to-one basis, and means that we can then sort of target our actions, our interventions and resources in the right direction. Yeah, and I've covered the networks already in terms of making sure that we make use of those, but also on a wider scale, taking part in other networks. So within the civil service, there's a civil service diversity and inclusion network. We're also part of the civil service disability network, and every part of my team has come from somewhere else, and we make sure that we link in with you know, the other networks that surround us. So I tie into some of my old police networks. We've got colleagues from external agencies and other departments that tie back into those, and it's a really fantastic way to share best practice learning and not have to sort of make the mistakes that others have made. Donna, if we could go to the final slide. So I guess for me, in terms of a review, it's always good to make sure that you go through and really do have that honest and frank conversation in terms of what has worked for you, what didn't work, those bits that can be improved, and how they can improve with what purpose. Making sure that you're checking the data, making sure that you understand what it's saying, and that you're asking the right questions of it. Often find that you can make data say what you want it to say, so it's really being able to hone down into what the questions are that you're asking of it. And then also doing the same thing with the feedback that you're getting, and then deciding where you're going to go from there. So as I said before, you know, we are a disability confident leader in DFTC, but we're not at the end of our journey. It doesn't mean that we've got there and we've got everything right yet. I think there's a whole load of opportunities, a whole load of different things that we can do better and differently, things that we're looking forward to take forwards. But there's also a lot of good work that we've done as well. So we, similar to the Metropolitan Police, use the Workplace Adjustments Passport. That's really something to, you know, make people feel at ease when they come here and not have to repeat those assessments over and over. We take part in a number of apprenticeships and also internships and work experience options, and, you know, going out there and finding out where we can draw from that wide pool, as it were, to give people the opportunity to see what we do and to see if we really are something that would fit them, and then attract them to coming to join us. As a public body, we use the public sector equality duty, and as a department, there's a lot of work that goes in and around equality impact assessments, making sure that we're considering all of those groups and that their thoughts, their concerns, and any issues they might raise are being heard early, which is key to the work that we do. And for me, as a D&I team, it's about adding value and really embodying that sense of diversity and inclusion to the wider business. So I always explain my job as trying to do myself out of the job, in that if every team and every group that we touch, you know, picks up those skills and appreciation of being considerate of diversity and wanting to include other people, then we would effectively not have a requirement for our team, and that's really the goal of our team. That's really what we're here to do. Thank you very much, Donna.
That's lovely, Mike. Thanks very much. You know, it is always interesting to hear what large organisations like the department Transport are doing to support diverse needs, you know, of their staff, and how they attract people with disabilities, like the guaranteed interview scheme that you mentioned. I think that support can easily transfer into smaller organisations too. So I think that was really useful. Thank you. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of all the presentations. But before we finish up, I have had a look at the questions panel, and there are a number of questions that have come through. So let's see how many we can get through in the last 5 minutes or so. Jane, there's a few here for you that we'll kickstart with. The first one: how can businesses encourage applicants from a diverse range of backgrounds?
Okay, great. Well, there's lots of things they can do. They can think about the job title, which can easily put people off. They can think about where they advertise, the images that they use in their advertisement. They can think about where they advertise and make sure that they're using community networks and other kinds of networks in the third sector very often to make sure that they encourage diverse applicants. And then they can do such a huge amount thinking through the criteria. That if I could be one place in a recruitment and selection process, it would be writing the criteria, because very often organisations write criteria that they don't really mean, like they must have 3 years experience or must have a degree or must have this, and they don't really mean it. It's just a shorthand. So and that's the place where organisations can do most about encouraging diverse applicants. I could go on, but should I stop, Donna?
Yes, maybe for now, but we can certainly come back to it with a blog afterwards if there's lots more information there to share with people, Jane. That's great. There's another question here, actually, Jane, about a business case for diversity and inclusion that you can maybe take. The question is: how should a business go about building a business case for diversity and inclusion?
Okay, so let's just take one example and then see whether we've got how much time. So if some of our clients come to us talking about they've got unwanted leavers, so people who are leaving and they don't want them to leave, and when we do exit interviews with them, what we have found is that sometimes it has not been an inclusive environment or culture, and so there is a number of people that organisation is losing because they are not good at diversity and inclusion. So there's a very simple example of how much does it cost to get a mid-level person in to replace that person. First of all, there's the human cost of the person that's leaving because they haven't been treated well or respected. And then there's the recruitment costs, the costs of training someone else up, the dip in performance of team members very often because they see what's happened and that the harassment hasn't been stopped. And we get people to do almost back of envelope calculations on that. And it's very easily 30, 50, 70 or more thousands of pounds just on that one person, particularly as in a law firm that we were working with. They were taking their clients out of the door to a competitor. So it's thinking about all the ways in which it might be legal fees that you're saving. It might be around all kinds of things about not winning bids from places like the Department of Transport because they're seen to be behind or out of date in relation to diversity and inclusion. So there's a couple of examples.
Lovely, thanks, Jane. Okay, Mike, we have a couple of questions specifically for you about DFT. The first one is: how do you change the culture in such a large organisation as DFT? Where would you start?
Oh, great question. So I think, well, when it comes to changing culture, it takes time, doesn't it? And when it comes to engaging people, basically I would really like to just start again, but obviously we can't do that. So the view that we take on it is that we effectively throw a whole load of stones into the lake, as it were, and start to build up those ripples. So working with our senior leaders, making sure they understand the current situation, what we're aiming for, why we're aiming for it, why it's a benefit to them, making sure that's tied into our values, making sure that we then make it really clear to people that are joining us that we care about diversity. There is a question when you join us specifically on diversity that will have an impact on whether you get the job or not. when we do procurement, there's a question there on that sort of social responsibility to make sure that we're saying to the people that we work with and that we're going to, hand over public money to, that it's important to us, it needs to be important to you, but also making sure that we listen to people. So using things like staff networks, really engaging them, making sure that they know what their role is, in terms of supporting their membership, but also making sure they're comfortable and confident to challenge us as HR and the D&I team and the business, but also that the flip side, which is us being able to go out to them and say, let's work together on this piece. So yeah, I guess it's everything at the same time and as much as possible would be the ideal. But I guess in terms of starting, really understanding your position and where you want to get to will give you that guidance, I think.
Lovely, Mike. Yeah, that's great. Another question specifically about you guys. What difference has the Disability Confident Leader badge that you've got made to DFT? What has changed? Yeah,
so I think for us, it really helps set the tone in terms of what we're aiming for. So DFT want to be an exemplar, not just a disability confidence leader, but an exemplar of it. And in that sense, we know that we have to work hard and harder than others in order to get to that point. We know that we're going to have to try things that others have not yet tried, and being comfortable with that bit of creativity and that unknown is part of it. I think for us, it's an outward sign of our dedication to it, and actually, I think that is an attractive thing to be able to say to others, that yes, we're still on this journey, we're still heading in the right direction, we're not there yet, but the things that we have done have highlighted us as a leader in this area, and that we are still, willing and striving to do better and more.
Brilliant. Okay, a couple of questions for Stuart that will probably finish us off. Stuart, how do you encourage staff to talk about the difficulties they face, because not everyone wants to ask for help?
Yeah, brilliant question. And actually, how I answer this question now and how I would have answered this question before the pandemic has probably changed. It's very different now that everybody is remote and not in the office. And we talked for a long time about creating safe environments and encouraging internal staff networks and really making sure simple things such as having a poster up in a common workspace or a canteen to say that your organization, it's good to talk, you encourage people to talk, and that there are resources available as the company to help. Now that we're all working from home, actually something Jane mentioned earlier on during her presentation really rang home with me, and it was that discretionary effort piece that line managers are now responsible for. And I think given the current climate, that's never been more important. One of the things Jane mentioned was making sure that line managers have a real sense of who their employees are. And I think that's really important, because once you get that sense of who your employees are, there's a real comfort level there, that social interaction is there. And I think even making yourself available as a line manager, scheduling drop-in sessions in your diary are important given the current climate. So even some of the stuff that Mike talked about, it's really just important that communication, especially now everything is digital, is vital, and your organizations need to be really seen to be communicating to their staff members that even during this pandemic, help, resources, support are available.
Lovely. Okay, I think we'll have one more question. There's been a number of questions that have come in about the software that you talked about earlier, Stuart, Read and Write. I wonder if you can give us a wee sort of brief summary on what that is and maybe where people can find out a little bit more information about it, and then we'll round things up here. Yeah, absolutely. It will need to be a brief summary. I could talk about Read and Write for another full webinar, as you could imagine. So Read and Write is text helps, assistive technology that is there to support employees who just to do everyday jobs, things that you find yourself being productive with during the day. So
It can benefit you with your Microsoft Office, your Outlook, your Excels. It can help you with your emails. It can help you with web pages. And it does that by really being assistive. So for someone with severe dyslexia, they might find it difficult to read a large document, but they might find that they're an auditory learner. So something as simple as text-to-speech, where that document can be read aloud to them, will be a massive benefit to them and will help them be much more productive and time managed throughout their day. Somebody with a visual impairment might need a screen masking tool that will simply put a nice coloured tint onto their computer screen now they're at home to block out the glare they didn't have in the office, but they now have from their bedroom window. So there really is a lot of practical solutions within the assistive technology to help people with a wide range of neurodiversities, but also stuff. Me personally, I'm not neurodiverse, but my spelling is atrocious, and we have Check It is one of our features, which is advanced spelling, grammar, homophone checker, and that picks up on all the really common mistakes, likes of the wrong where or the wrong there that we all make. I think we've all got a bit too used to text typing as opposed to typing properly. If you want to find out more, that there's a lot of us at Text Help. You can reach us on LinkedIn, you can send us an email, and I'm sure Donna will share some links to our webpage after this. And we would all be more than happy to talk you through how we can spread the message about neurodiversity, but also support your staff.
Lovely, Stuart, thank you. Okay, I know we didn't get through all of the questions that were asked in today's session live, but we will respond either directly to you, or if there's a collection of questions, we'll put them up on a blog on our website. So I hope you found the presentations useful and you have already taken some of the practical advice into your own organisation that will really help you enhance your diversity and inclusion strategy. I want to say a special thanks to our panellists today, Jane Farrell, Mike Hickman and Stuart Blair, for sharing their knowledge and really vast experience on this topic. As you can see, their contact details are on the screen now if you'd like to reach out directly to any of them for any of further information on anything that they discussed in today's session. So thanks everyone for listening and have a great afternoon.